What's up everybody, welcome to another Python 3 recipe, and today's video draws your attention on a very sneaky problem and mistake that most Python developers do, which is updating a list or any mutable sequence for that matter while iterating on it at the same time. And by updating, I'm talking about, let's say, removing something from the sequence or adding something inside of the sequence and doing that in place while iterating on it. And in this video we're going to see why it's a very bad idea to do that, especially using the for loop. So let's say, for example, for this problem, our problem statement, just to make things a little bit concrete, we have our list of reviews as we have been using. We are maintaining this list of reviews, but we are not very happy that so many people are giving very bad reviews to our movies, and we want to remove every review that is for which the score is lower than 2, and we want to do this in place. And by in place I mean we want to edit the same list, not create a new list, but do these changes in place. And the purpose is to see if we can do this with a for loop. Well, as far as I know, this is not something that we can achieve with the for loop, and to see why, let's run this first snippet. Alright, so at this line we're trying to construct our list of reviews, and here we try to print the ID and the length and also the content of the review, so just so we can see what is in it, and also that all our operations are happening in place, as you can see before this logic that we will explain, and after that logic the ID is the same. The ID of the review that we are using is the same. The length has been changed and the content has been changed. And also, just before we get into the logic, we can see that that logic is not accomplished, it's not doing the job, because after that we still have 1.4, which is lower than 2, and we still have 0.1, which is lower than 2. So what is happening here? Because this logic at first glance looks kind of normal, and you can ignore all the print here, just focus on the real content. Is the printer just for helping and to visually debug what is happening, but the logic itself is quite simple. We are looping over the reviews, and we try to condition if the review is lower or equal to 2, we want to delete it using this syntax or the reviews.pop, passing the index, and that's pretty much it. And what is happening under the hood is that we are not actually accomplishing what we are willing to do, as you can see from the result here. But let's see why. Let's see why by inspecting this print statement that I've added. So let's say before entering that logic, this is the content of our reviews. This is our reviews list, and we are trying to remove everything that is lower than 2.0. And the first time we enter in that loop, here we have at item 0 2.5, which is normal, we are not removing anything. The second time we enter, we are at item 1, which is 1.0 here. So yes, indeed, we want to remove something from the list, and this is what the list looks like after we have done the removal, which is done in place. So yes, 1.0 was removed. Then what happens now is that everything, like before when we were at this step, 1.0 was at index 1. Now 1.4 is the value at index 1, and what is happening is that we are now moving in, but our for loop is now at iteration 2, is no more at item 1, which is why here if we like arrive to this fourth step, because this is the step where we are actually removing something else, we are actually trying to remove something very far here. It means that we are no more considering this as something that is lower than 2.0. And the reason is that the for loop gives us an iterator which we are trying to iterate on, and at the same time that the for loop has given us that iterator, the iterable from which the iterator was created, the iterable length was modified during the process, which is not which is the reason why we are having this inconsistency. So to repeat that again, when we are at this, when we remove 1.1, the length of the reviews has been changed, and everything else is now the indices of these are now shifted to the left by 1. So because this has been removed, so now 1.4 is the element at index 1. But index 1 has already been processed, and we are moving to index 2, which means that 1.4 will never be processed anymore, will never be processed again, which is why we are having this inconsistent result, despite the fact that the code looks pretty normal, the code looks okay, but it's not accomplishing the job. And once we will see iterator later in the series, you will understand better what I mean by iterator. But for now, just bear with me. It's a very, very bad idea to modify a list in place while iterating on it with a for loop. So it's a very bad idea to do that. And you may think, okay, maybe it's because we are iterating on the same thing that we are updating. And what about creating a copy first of the value on which we are trying to of the sequence that we are trying to iterate on? Well, that's what this second snippet is trying to do, and it's still a bad idea to do that, because let's consider that this second code snippet. Here we are trying to do pretty much the same, with the exception that instead of putting the same review here as we did here, the same reviews list, we are actually passing a copy of it. And the way to copy is just use the slice syntax like this. And just for proof that it's not the same Python object, you can see that the IDs in memory are different. So Python is creating a different object in memory when you're trying to copy that way. It contains the same values, but it's a different Python object. Now what happens in this case, we have our same for loop, the logic that we are trying to accomplish, and again you can already see that we are even getting an exception. But in the process, what is happening is very wrong. Even if we didn't got that exception, the final result wouldn't have been correct. And let's see why. So okay, here we are iterating at position 0, so this is 2.5, which is fine, and it's bigger than 2.0, so we are not removing anything. Now when we are at item 1, we are trying to remove 1.0, which is fine. We remove it from the reviews list. This looks okay. Now when we go to item 2, we are trying to remove 1.4, which is at index 2. But now remember, we are iterating on the copy, not on the reviews list itself, because now when it comes to reviews, the reviews list itself, 1.4 is not at index 2, it's at index 1, because we have deleted 1.0, so everything was shifted to the left by 1. But this happened on the reviews, not on the copy. So on the copy list, 1.4 is still at index 2, but in the reviews list, 1.4 is now at index 1, which is why after this attempt to remove 1.4, we still have 1.4, which hasn't been removed at all. And same arguments goes for 1.1 and 1.8 actually. 1.8 it does remove, but the argument remains the same basically. So we are trying to iterate on the copy and remove on another list, which is inconsistent still. So well, how can we do this? How can we update a sequence, a mutable sequence in Python, and in our scenario here, a list, while iterating on it? Well, the answer is you use a while loop. You use a while loop, not a for loop. And the reason is, like I said already here, the for loop, with the for loop you don't have very much control over how these indices are being created, because they are directly created by an iterator, which is created from the iterable you're trying to iterate on. So you don't have control over the indices you're trying to index. But with the while loop, you have control over how and when you want to increment the indices. So let's see how by running this snippet here. And you can see, again, we are having the same object ID at the beginning and at the end of our logic, which means that the operation is happening in place. And here we have we can see that the result is correct because there is nothing in this reviews that has been updated in place that is lower or equal to 2.0. And let's see what is happening here. Let's look at this logic. So here we start with the counter to 0 and we loop, and each time we try to condition on this condition, and if it's true we delete. If it's not true, then we increment the counter. So you see we have much more flexibility and control and power over when we want to increment the counter. And let's see how this comes into play here. Let's start to 0 again, like we did for the other cases. So here we are at index equals 0, so this I is equal to 0, so we are at this position. It's not lower than 2.0, so it's fine. It's fine, so we don't enter here, so it means that we are here, so we have to increment the counter. Okay, so now that we have incremented the counter, we are now at this position, and when we are at this position, what is the value of review is actually 1.0, which is lower, so yes, we want to delete it. And once we delete it, what happens? This is popped out and everything is shifted to left by 1, which is the reason why we don't want to increment the counter at this level. When we delete, we don't want to increment the counter because everything after we have deleted 1.0, everything was shifted to the left. So when we continue and try to remove 1.0, we are still at index 1 because we haven't incremented the counter. And you see, after here and here, you can see that 1.0 is now removed, and so on and so forth. So the same logic applies. We have control over when we want to increment the counter. The counter is not coming from the iterator. So the key takeaway from this video is that when you are required to do in-place operation on a mutable sequence, in-place operation on a mutable sequence, you don't want to do that using a for loop. You don't want to do that using a for loop. That's the key takeaway. You want to use the while loop. So keep that in mind. This is a very sneaky mistake and it's very easy to make. So I hope after watching this video you'll be very aware, and thank you for watching. That's pretty much it about this recipe. Hopefully you learned something new, and if the case, please give it a thumbs up, and feel free to ask any question in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to answer those, and you can find the code for this recipe in the description of the video. Be sure to subscribe for future recipes, and thanks for watching. See you later.